I didn't even notice the first time I looked. I was scrolling fast, like everyone does, just killing a few minutes between emails, waiting for coffee to brew, phone half-propped against a cereal box. It was Lena's birthday, and of course, there she was, front and center in every damn photo, hair blown out, cheeks glowing, holding her crystal glass like it had been surgically attached. 32 pictures. I counted, and I was in none of them. At first, I told myself it was an accident. Maybe she just hadn't posted the rest yet. Maybe I was in the stories and they already expired. Maybe, hell, maybe I blinked in every shot and she saved me the embarrassment. But by the time I hit the 8th carousel post and still hadn't seen even the tip of my elbow or a blurry shoe that could be mine, it stopped being maybe. It was deliberate. I had been erased. Let me tell you something about being erased. It's worse than being insulted, worse than being mocked, worse than being criticized. At least when someone fights with you, they're admitting you exist. When someone pretends you weren't even there, when they gather the whole damn family and half the town and forget you like an extra chair, it's like being ghosted by your own blood. And the worst part? It wasn't even the first time. I was at that party. I wore a red dress I'd bought specifically because I knew Lena hated it. She once said red was too aggressive for family events. I brought a bottle of champagne from France, one I'd picked up during a client's retreat I led in Bordeaux. I gave a goddamn toast. And yet when she posted that caption, "Best birthday ever," surrounded by all the people who matter, I was nowhere. And suddenly the toast felt pathetic. The champagne felt like a bribe. And the red dress just made me look loud and lonely. It's easy to laugh at something like this from the outside. So what? It's just social media, people would say. Why does it matter? But if you've ever grown up in a family where you're always the afterthought, the overlooked one, the one who gets the end seat at the table and the $2 birthday card mailed a week late, then you know it's never just social media. It's a public scoreboard. It's the stage where people like Lena perform their curated perfection and erase whatever doesn't match the aesthetic. And apparently, I don't match. I've never matched. We've always been different, me and her. Lena's the type who knew how to bat her lashes by age 6. She had this innocent baby voice that made people lean in and coddle her. Teachers loved her. Boys chased her. Our mom acted like Lena's hair getting frizzy was a national emergency. And me? I was the one who talked too much, asked too many questions, got called bossy before I even knew what that word meant. I wasn't wild, I was just awake. But in our house, awake girls made everyone uncomfortable. I moved to New York when I was 22, didn't come home for the holidays for 4 years straight. I started my own consulting business, and I don't say this to brag, but I built it from nothing. No loans, no husband, no safety net. I clawed my way into boardrooms filled with men who called me sweetheart before they heard my pitch and ma'am after they saw my numbers. I worked 7 days a week. I never asked for a single favor. And when Dad got sick, I wired money to Mom's account to help with medical bills, even though she never thanked me. Lena? Lena married Peter Kingston, who came with a house, a lake membership, and a father with an insurance company. She quit her job a year in and took up content creation full-time. Which is ironic because the only content she ever creates is pictures of herself pretending to be happy with a life she didn't build. The thing is, I didn't even want to go to that party. I almost didn't. I had a Zoom meeting that ran long. I was late getting to the airport and the dress barely fit right. But I thought, foolishly, I admit, that maybe this year it'd be different. That maybe, just maybe, someone would say, "Wow, Cassie, you've really made something of yourself." Or at the very least, "Hey, it's good to see you." But no one said that. What they did say, between awkward hugs and Lena's shrill laughter, was, "Oh wow, you're still doing that work thing, right? And is it true you're still single? And my personal favorite, you look so tired, honey. Are you okay?" I was okay, until that night. Until I sat on my couch with the cheap wine I didn't even like, opened my phone, and saw my erasure printed and shared and liked by 200 people who probably didn't even know I was there. That was the moment. That was the last straw. That was the exact second I realized I didn't want to be included. I wanted to be remembered. And if the only way they'd remember me was by making a scene, then fine. I'd give them a scene. I picked up my phone and called a friend I hadn't spoken to in a year, a guy named Dave who once dated my old roommate and now flew banners over beaches for proposals and baby announcements. I asked him one question. How much would it cost to fly a banner over a gated community in South Carolina for 3 hours next Saturday? He asked me what I wanted it to say. And I told him. Tell them, loud enough for every damn guest to look up from their mimosa and squint into the sun, I'm busy building an empire. Because maybe that's petty. Maybe it's childish. Maybe it's ridiculous. But maybe, just maybe, it's the only language my family understands. And for once in my life, I wasn't going to whisper. I was going to fly. It didn't start with the birthday party, or the missing photos, or even the banner I sent flying over Lena's perfect backyard brunch like a petty hurricane. It started years before. Back when we were just two kids lying side by side under a trampoline in the middle of a South Carolina summer, licking popsicles and pretending we were sisters from another planet. I remember it like a fever dream, sticky and loud and too bright, the air thick with the smell of cut grass and suntan lotion, Lena giggling in that high-pitched way that made every adult turn their head and coo. I had just taken the purple popsicle, her favorite, without asking, and she looked at me like I'd killed her goldfish. You always take the best one, she whined, and without even thinking, I handed it over. That's how it always went. She complained. I gave in. She pouted. I apologized. She cried. I was blamed. And the thing was, nobody told me I had to do it. They just made it clear that life was easier when Lena was happy and I was quiet. I learned young that fairness was a myth, especially in families. Mom had this way of looking at Lena like she was a prize she'd won in a silent auction, and I was just the extra item they threw in for free. She always said Lena was sensitive, like that made her special, like the world had to bend around her feelings. When Lena got scared of thunder, the TV got turned off. When Lena got tired, everyone went home. When Lena cried, I got a lecture about being too loud, too bossy, too much. One year, I must have been around 11, Lena maybe 7, I got straight A's on my report card. Not just good grades, but perfect. I brought it home with this swelling pride in my chest, like maybe this time someone would notice me. Maybe this time Mom would put it on the fridge, or tell her friends, or, God forbid, take me out for ice cream. Instead, she glanced at the paper, nodded, and said, Good job, Cassie, but don't brag, okay? Lena's still struggling with math. And just like that, my victory wasn't a victory. It was a threat to the family's balance, and I had upset it. That was the story of my childhood, achievements ignored, struggles criticized, independence mistaken for arrogance. I wasn't the favorite, and I wasn't the rebel either. I was just extra, unnecessary, the backup daughter. Lena was the center of gravity, and the rest of us orbited around her, whether we wanted to or not. Dad was the only one who ever saw through it. He had this quiet way of noticing things, like when I stayed up too late reading or skipped meals because I was stressed about finals. He didn't say much, but he left little notes sometimes, proud of you, or don't forget to sleep, and I clung to those scraps like gold. But after he died, that thread of sanity snapped, and it was just me and the Monroe women left. And trust me, you don't want to be the odd woman out in a family of women who think closeness means pretending. After Dad passed, Lena really stepped into her role. She hosted family dinners, organized holidays, became the queen bee of emotional control. But none of it was real. Everything had to look perfect, from the way the napkins were folded to the tone of voice we used when we asked about each other's lives. It wasn't conversation, it was performance. And I wasn't interested in playing a part that required me to be grateful for being tolerated. Over the years, I tried to pull back. I stopped coming to Christmas every other year. I declined invitations to baby showers and school plays and wine-tasting weekends. Not out of spite, at least not at first, but out of self-preservation. Every gathering felt like a reunion for a show I hadn't been cast in. Every time I showed up, I ended up standing in a corner, drink in hand, answering the same questions from the same people about whether I was still doing that little business thing and still single in that big OL city. And every time I left, I promised myself it would be the last time I walked into that house expecting something different. But of course, expectations are funny like that. Even after all those years of being invisible, there was still a part of me, small and stupid and stubborn, that believed they might see me one day. Not for what I could do, not for how successful I'd become, but for who I actually was. Someone strong, someone smart, someone who got up every morning and fought for a life that wasn't handed to her. Lena, on the other hand, never had to fight for anything. She just had to be. People love to talk about how hard it is to be beautiful, to be adored, to be the one everyone watches, but I'd argue it's a hell of a lot harder to be the one who's always just out of frame. You learn to talk to yourself. You learn to clap for yourself. You learn to build your own mirror because no one else is reflecting you back. So no, the birthday party wasn't some isolated incident. It was just the latest headline in a lifetime of erasure. A final, glossy, filtered version of the same message I've always gotten from my family: you don't belong in the picture. And maybe I should have just shrugged it off. Maybe I should have taken the high road, posted some passive-aggressive tweet, called a therapist, journaled about my feelings. But instead, I made a phone call. I planned something big. Something they'd never forget. Something they'd all look up at, squinting into the sunlight, and finally see. Because if they weren't going to give me space in their narrative, I'd make my own headline. And I wasn't going to whisper. I was going to scream. It came in a group text, one of those half-hearted things people send when they don't want to leave you out entirely, but also can't be bothered to send it to you alone, like an afterthought glued onto the side of someone else's priority list. Hey everyone! Lena's birthday next Saturday at the house. Brunch starts at 11. Bring your best smiles. There was no "Hey Cass, would love to see you," no actual invitation, no follow-up from Lena herself. Just a group text, buried between a dentist reminder and an investor request for my updated numbers. And for a minute, I wasn't going to go. Truly, I had no intention of stepping into that perfectly manicured backyard with its folding white chairs and floral arrangements designed to match Lena's latest Instagram aesthetic. I had a pitch meeting on Friday night in Chicago, a red-eye flight back to New York, and honestly, the thought of seeing Peter's smug face and our mother's fake smile made me want to pull a blanket over my head and wait until the weekend was over. But something kept clawing at the back of my mind like a stray cat, trying to get in, not hope exactly, not the idea that things would be different, but a kind of dull, stubborn curiosity. Maybe it wasn't a conscious choice, but some part of me still wanted to be seen. Maybe I needed to see how far they'd really go. So I booked the flight. I packed the red dress I'd only worn once before, the one with the plunging neckline and the unapologetic shade that made people stare and then quickly look away. I didn't buy a present. I didn't even bring a card. I told myself I was just going to drop in, stay for an hour, make a plate, and leave before the worst of it started. But of course, it started the second I walked in. Peter answered the door with that grin that always felt like it belonged on a used car salesman, too wide, too white, and entirely insincere. He gave me one of those half hugs that says, "I don't actually want to touch you, but social norms demand it," then immediately turned and shouted over his shoulder, "Lena, Cassie's here," like I was a delivery person bringing a box no one remembered ordering. When Lena appeared, it was in slow motion, like always. Her dress was pastel, her heels too high for grass, her smile stretched just enough to crack, but not enough to break. She kissed me on the cheek like we hadn't gone months without speaking, and she said, "Oh wow, you made it." That's so sweet, which, if you know Lena, is code for, "Why are you here?" I stood there, wine bottle in hand, unsure where to go or who to talk to. The lawn was dotted with friends from Lena's circle, women with polished fingernails, and men with polo shirts tucked into their khaki shorts. Children ran between tables, screaming and sticky, and our mother was already seated in her usual spot near the shade, holding a mimosa like a lifeline and smiling at nothing in particular. No one asked me about my business. No one mentioned the article that had just been written about me in Forbes. No one even brought up the fact that I'd flown across the country to be there. Instead, they asked if I was still doing all that city stuff and whether I was dating anyone serious yet. One woman I didn't recognize asked if I'd lost weight, but it didn't sound like a compliment. It sounded like concern disguised as curiosity, the way people talk when they want to say something but don't have the guts to be direct. During brunch, I tried to join a conversation about real estate, thinking maybe I could at least contribute something useful. But one of Peter's old college friends cut me off mid-sentence to tell a story about the time he and Peter got locked out of their dorm in their boxers. Everyone laughed like it was the funniest thing they'd ever heard. I just sat there, chewing my frittata, feeling like I was melting through the chair. Then came the toast. I didn't want to do it, but our mother nudged me and whispered, "Say something nice, Cassie. Don't just sit there like a statue." So I stood up, cleared my throat, and gave a short, polite toast, something about sisters and shared memories and growing older with grace. I don't even remember the words. They came out cold and mechanical, like reading instructions off the back of a cereal box. No one clapped. Lena gave me a tight smile, and Peter raised his glass halfway before turning back to his friend and whispering something that made both of them snort into their drinks. I stayed for another 30 minutes, long enough to help carry the second round of drinks to the outdoor bar, long enough to wipe one of Lena's kids' hands after they spilled juice on the deck, long enough to know that I was a prop in someone else's performance and nothing more. And when I left, no one stopped me. No one said goodbye. No one followed up later to say it was good to see me. I flew home that night and sat in the airport lounge staring at my phone, watching as Lena began posting photos. The brunch spread. The decorations. Her holding the kids. Peter kissing her cheek. Our mother in the background, eyes closed, looking serene. And not one single picture of me. I hadn't just been ignored. I'd been erased. And that's when the switch flipped. It wasn't anger at first, it was clarity. The kind of bone-deep realization that makes you sit very still because you finally understand something terrible and undeniable. They don't see me. Not even when I'm standing right in front of them. Not even when I make the effort, show up, dress up, smile, pretend. I was wallpaper. I was filler. I was nothing. But I wouldn't be nothing for long. If they wanted a spectacle, I'd give them one they'd never forget. Something they couldn't crop out or filter or pretend didn't happen. I didn't want to be their favorite. I didn't even want to be forgiven. I just wanted them to look up, for once in their curated, filtered lives, and remember that I exist. So I made the call. The banner was just the beginning. It was sometime after midnight when I made the call, sitting cross-legged on the cold kitchen floor of my apartment with an untouched glass of wine and my laptop still open, the soft glow of spreadsheets and projections flickering like distant fireworks I didn't care about anymore. The silence was heavy, not the comforting kind, but the hollow kind that makes you think maybe no one would notice if you stopped talking altogether. I had watched Lena's posts come in throughout the night, picture after picture like bullets, all curated and filtered and captioned in that nauseatingly perfect tone she had perfected like it was an art form. And still, not a single one of me. Not even a passing mention. Not even a goddamn thanks to everyone who came. By then, it wasn't just about the photos anymore. It was about the pattern. It was about every moment in the last decade I'd swallowed something bitter and smiled anyway. Every text I answered even when I knew they were just sending it out of guilt. Every family dinner where I bit my tongue while they praised Lena's parenting like it was a divine calling and barely acknowledged the business I'd spent my whole adult life building. They didn't care about what I did because it didn't fit their version of success. I didn't wear pastel dresses, I didn't host baby showers, and I didn't shrink myself into someone easy to digest. And in that moment, I didn't want to be digestible. I wanted to be unforgettable. I scrolled through my contacts, stopping at a name I hadn't seen in years, Dave Sanderson. We'd never been close, but he used to date my old roommate Heather and stuck around for months longer than anyone expected. He was odd in that kind of charming, doesn't give a damn way that made him immune to most social norms, which is probably why he ended up flying planes with banners for a living. The last time I'd spoken to him, he was debating whether to tow a proposal sign over a monster truck rally or retire and open a dog sanctuary. I had no idea where he landed, but I was desperate and slightly unhinged, so I pressed the call button and held my breath. To my surprise, he picked up on the third ring, his voice groggy but familiar, like an old song you forgot you liked. Cassie? Damn, haven't heard from you since Heather left for Portland. What's up? You sound like you're about to commit a felony or get a tattoo. Maybe both, I said, my voice sharper than I intended but too tired to smooth out. I need a banner. Like one of those giant ones you tow behind planes. And I need it over a specific address in Charleston, this Saturday around brunch time. He didn't laugh. He didn't ask why. He just paused for a beat and said, "You pay up front, I don't ask questions. But you better tell me what the hell's going on at some point, because this already sounds like a better story than most of my clients give me." I told him the address, gave him the date, and when he asked what I wanted the banner to say, the words came out of me like a reflex, like I'd been holding them in for too long and finally let them rip. I'm busy building an empire. There was another pause. Then, slowly, Dave said, "Damn. That's cold. I like it." I wired him the money that night, more than I should have, because I wanted him to do it right. I wanted the plane low enough to make people squint, the letters big enough to be read in a photograph, and the timing perfect, right when the second round of mimosas was being poured, when the party had reached its peak, when Lena would be on her third fake laugh and Peter would be telling another story about how he almost got recruited for pro baseball. I wanted it to drop like a bomb from the sky, not to destroy anything, but to remind them that I existed loudly, unapologetically, and completely outside their little curated world. After I hung up, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't even feel angry. I just felt still, like something inside me had stopped spinning for the first time in years. The banner wasn't about revenge, it was about reclamation. About taking back my space, my story, my voice, in a way that they couldn't ignore or twist into something small and insignificant. In the days that followed, I went through the motions of work and life with a strange sense of detachment. I met with clients, responded to emails, even went to a yoga class where the instructor told us to let go of what no longer serves us, and all I could think was, what if what doesn't serve you is your own family? What then? Do you just walk away, leave the table, start a new one somewhere else? I didn't have the answer. I still don't. But I knew one thing, I was done trying to fit into a frame I was never meant to be in. I wasn't going to ask for a seat anymore. I wasn't going to smile through another toast or pose for another photo where I had to contort myself into the version of Cassie they found acceptable. This banner, it wasn't a middle finger. It was a mirror, a message, a declaration. I am not quiet. I am not invisible. I am not yours to forget. And come Saturday, the sky was going to say it for me. Write in long sentences of 8 words or more. Don't use emojis. Generate only the title of the section and the story text itself, no subheadings. Each chapter should be no less than 4,500 characters or 600 plus words. Let's move on to the next chapter. ChatGPT Episode 5. The banner. The morning of the banner flight started like any other, quiet and unimpressive, with the smell of burnt coffee in the air and a dull gray sky threatening rain that never really came. I had taken the red-eye to Charleston the night before, not because I had to be there in person, Dave could have handled it alone, but because I needed to see it with my own eyes, needed to feel the ground beneath me when it happened. Needed to know that I hadn't imagined the years of being ignored and reduced and smoothed over like a blemish on Lena's glossy life. I wanted to witness their perfect brunch get disrupted by something as blunt and undeniable as black letters screaming across a blue sky, because no matter how petty it sounded on paper, I wasn't doing it for shock. I was doing it for clarity. I sat in a rental car 3 blocks from the house, parked beneath an old oak tree, windows rolled down, radio off. From that distance, I couldn't hear anything, but I could see the tops of the party tents poking above the fence line, could make out the shimmer of wine glasses on white linen tables, could imagine the exact pitch of Lena's laughter rising above the crowd like a dog whistle only family could hear. I checked my watch every 30 seconds, heart racing in that tight, fluttery way that makes you question if your body's on your side or trying to sabotage you. Dave had said 11:30 sharp, wind conditions permitting. He hadn't flown a banner over a gated community before, but he was up for the challenge, and I trusted him with it because this wasn't about precision, it was about impact. When I finally heard the low hum of the plane's engine breaking through the Carolina sky, I sat up straighter and gripped the steering wheel like I was about to take off myself. It started faint, a distant buzz, then grew louder, more insistent, until the sound filled the air like a warning siren for the emotionally repressed. And then I saw it, rising above the trees, slow and steady, like an omen or a blessing, depending on which side of the table you were sitting on. The banner flapped behind it in bold, black capital letters that read exactly what I had told him to write. I'm busy building an empire. 8 words. Nothing fancy. No hashtags. No names. But the message was clear enough to stop a conversation mid-sentence, to pull eyes from phones and sunglasses and fruit-topped pancakes, to cut through the curated perfection like a razor through silk. I imagined Lena looking up from her mimosa, squinting into the sky, mouth parting just enough to whisper my name. I imagined Peter laughing at first, then realizing this wasn't a joke. I imagined our mother's face freezing in that polite, party smile way she'd practiced for decades, trying to calculate whether this was an embarrassment or a teachable moment. And I didn't flinch. I didn't feel guilty or cruel or ashamed. I didn't second-guess it, didn't reach for my phone to see if anyone had texted me, didn't wonder if maybe I had crossed some invisible line. Because the truth was, there had never been a line for me. Just a wide, empty space I was supposed to stand in quietly while everyone else got to dance in the spotlight. And maybe this wasn't the right way to demand space, but it was mine, and after a lifetime of sitting in the corner, I wasn't about to apologize for standing up. The banner circled twice, slow and deliberate, like a plane writing a chapter in a book only I had read. A few neighbors stepped outside to see what the commotion was, some holding phones, others shielding their eyes with sunburned hands. The plane wasn't even that loud, but in a neighborhood like that, gated, manicured, desperate to be left alone, a noise like that might as well have been an earthquake. I could picture the whispers starting, the social media speculation, the awkward questions, the too loud denials. I didn't need to be there to see the panic ripple across Lena's perfect afternoon like a stain spreading on silk. What I didn't expect, though, was what happened next. My phone buzzed, not with a call from Lena, or a text from Peter, or even a panicked voice memo from our mother, but with an email. A real, formal, typed email, subject line all caps, "Congrats on the stunt. Let's talk." It was from a woman named Rachel Chin, a venture capitalist I'd pitched to twice before without success, someone who'd once told me, "We love your energy, but we're not sure you've found your audience yet." Apparently, my audience had arrived in the form of 1,000 shocked brunch guests and a banner flying over their heads like a revolution in Helvetica bold. Rachel's email continued, bold, brilliant, brutal. "Can you hop on a call next week?" I read it twice, then a third time. And then I laughed, the kind of laugh that starts low in your chest and climbs until your ribs hurt and your eyes sting, because of course it took a public spectacle for someone like her to take me seriously. Of course it took a banner, not a business plan. Of course they had to look up before they saw me. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt something like peace. Not because I had won, whatever that meant, not because Lena would finally call me, or our mother would finally apologize, or Peter would stop making passive-aggressive comments about girls with something to prove, but because I had done something loud. Something undeniable, something entirely mine. I didn't vanish. I didn't shrink. I didn't blend into the background like I'd been trained to do. I flew a damn banner. And they would never be able to say they didn't see it. The silence came faster than I expected and settled deeper than I'd prepared for, not the explosive kind you brace for after a public stunt, but the hollow, surgical kind that cuts everything off before it can take shape. I thought there might be yelling, or at the very least, some passive-aggressive message from our mother about how disruptions aren't elegant, or perhaps even a shaky-voiced call from Lena asking what the hell I was thinking. How dare I ruin her moment, her party, her curated peace. But instead, there was nothing. No call, no text, no cryptic social media posts or lukewarm attempts at humor. Just radio silence from the entire Monroe family, like they had all agreed, without me of course, that the best way to handle an outburst was to pretend it never happened. For a few days, I watched from a distance, like someone trying to read the weather by staring at the horizon, waiting for clouds to move, for storms to form. But all I saw was stillness. Lena didn't post anything else after the party, not even a throwback photo, not a single "thanks for the love" or "best day ever" story. Just nothing. Her feed stopped dead, and for someone like her, someone who lived off the appearance of joy and togetherness and fake spontaneity, that told me everything I needed to know. She had been rattled. And maybe she didn't know how to respond to something that couldn't be filtered or deleted or spun into a punchline. But what caught me off guard, what truly sank its teeth in, was how hollow I felt in the aftermath. I thought I would be exhilarated, riding the wave of defiance, the adrenaline of being seen on my own terms. And for a moment, I was. For a moment, I felt electric. But once the current passed, I was just alone. Alone in a small apartment full of success that no one in my family cared about. Alone with my thoughts replaying the look I imagined on Lena's face, not because I wanted to hurt her, but because I wanted, for once, to mean something. Even if it was anger. Even if it was betrayal. What does it say about a person when they'd rather be hated than ignored? I tried to keep moving, tried to focus on the silver linings, the meeting scheduled with Rachel Chin, the unexpected surge of traffic to my business site, the handful of new client inquiries that came in through word of mouth and curiosity. The banner had made noise in the right circles, and professionally, it had done more for my reputation than any conference or campaign I'd funded in the last year. People liked audacity, especially when it was wrapped in a personal story and executed with a kind of unapologetic clarity that made you impossible to ignore. But even that started to feel strange, like I had cracked open some part of myself that wasn't meant to be monetized. Every compliment felt a little crooked. Every meeting began with, "That was bold, Cassie," and ended with them asking if I had more stories like that up my sleeve. They didn't see the years of build-up, the pain, the dismissal, the quiet war I had fought every holiday, every visit home. They just saw a headline moment, a spectacle, and wanted more of the same. One night, maybe a week after the flight, I finally got a message from my mother. It wasn't a phone call, not even a voicemail. It was a short, clipped text that read, "I hope you got whatever you needed from that stunt. Your sister is hurt, but she's trying to be graceful about it. Maybe it's time you apologized." I read it 5 times before putting the phone down. Then I picked it back up and read it again. Not once did she ask why I did it. Not once did she acknowledge the years I spent invisible, the dinner tables I sat beside instead of at, the questions about my life that went unanswered because no one cared to listen. No, to her, it was a stunt. Something juvenile. Something embarrassing. Something beneath the standards of a good family. I didn't reply. Because what could I say that I hadn't already screamed from the sky? The truth is, People like my mother don't want honesty. They want peace at any cost, even if that peace is built on the backs of the quiet ones. They want harmony so badly they're willing to silence their own children for it. Lena had been hurt, she said. But hadn't I been hurt too? For years? For decades? Didn't I deserve to be heard out loud? But even with all that logic swirling in my head, I still felt it, that ache, that guilt, that deep, sharp pang that only comes when you go against the people who raised you, no matter how flawed they are. I didn't regret the banner. I didn't even regret the fallout. But I regretted needing to go that far to feel like I mattered. I regretted that nothing smaller had ever worked. I regretted the years I spent waiting for validation that was never going to come. And maybe most of all, I regretted that the only thing I could do to be seen was force their eyes upward. I don't know what I expected to happen next, some kind of reckoning, a confrontation, an apology, or even a heartfelt email from Lena saying she finally understood how I felt. But none of that came. And deep down, I knew it never would. Because families like mine don't deal in truth. They deal in image. And the only way to survive in that kind of world is to either play along or burn it down. I didn't want to burn it all. But I wasn't going to rebuild it either. Not alone. Not again. And so, for the first time in a long time, I started thinking about what I wanted, not what I wanted them to see, not what I wanted to prove, but what I wanted to feel. Maybe the next empire I built wouldn't be for anyone else. Maybe it would finally, fully, be for me. It was almost 2 weeks after the banner flew when I received the letter, the real kind, with handwriting that made my throat tighten before I'd even opened it, the kind of handwriting that belonged to someone long gone but never really absent. The envelope was tucked beneath a stack of forwarded mail, wedged between a health insurance statement and a startup newsletter I kept meaning to unsubscribe from, and at first, I didn't recognize it. But once I saw the looping M in Monroe written across the center, I knew exactly who it was from. It was my father's handwriting, no doubt about it, unmistakable and slow, as if he'd always been writing to someone he hoped would read between the lines. It wasn't dated, but judging by the faded paper and the slight yellowing at the edges, it had been written months, maybe even years ago. My mother must have found it tucked in some drawer after he died, and, true to form, sat on it until she couldn't anymore. Or maybe she never intended to send it at all, and fate had finally done me a small favor. Either way, I read it alone, standing at my kitchen counter with the kind of caution you use when handling something delicate, like it might vanish the second you understand it too clearly. He started simply, like always Cassie, my girl, he wrote, and I could hear his voice in those words, soft but steady, never rushing, never sharp. He had always been the calm one, the observer, the man who noticed when I was quiet and asked real questions instead of giving rehearsed praise. The letter was short, barely more than a page, but it said more than any conversation I'd ever had with my mother in the last 20 years. He wrote about regret, about how he'd watched the dynamic between me and Lena unfold over the years and how powerless he sometimes felt to change it. He said he admired my strength, the way I carried my ambition like armor, but never let it make me cruel. He told me he was proud, not in a general way, but in a pointed, deliberate way that made my chest ache. I know they don't always see you, he wrote, but I do. I always have. And that one sentence undid something in me. I sat down on the floor with the letter in my lap and let myself feel it, not just the grief for him, which never really went away, but the grief for the girl I used to be, the one who spent years trying to be visible in a house that only lit up for one. I realized in that moment that my father had always been the only person in our family who truly saw the cost of being the quiet one, the one who didn't demand attention, but deserved it anyway. And now he was gone, and all I had left was a page and a memory, and the bitter understanding that what I needed most had only ever come from him. Later that evening, just as the sky was turning that weird purple-gray color that makes everything feel suspended, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. I was tired, emotionally drained, still clutching the echo of my father's words, but something in me said pick up. And I did. And it was Peter. His voice was stiff, the way a man sounds when he's trying not to say the wrong thing, but doesn't know what the right thing is either. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't apologize. He just cleared his throat and said, "So that banner made a bit of a splash." I waited. I didn't give him anything. After a moment, he added, "I know we've never been close, and I've probably said a lot of dumb shit over the years, but I think maybe you're right. About all of it." That caught me off guard more than the silence had. He kept talking, saying how the party had been a disaster after the plane flew by, how Lena had gone upstairs and locked herself in the bathroom for nearly an hour, and how their mother had refused to speak to anyone the rest of the day. At first, he thought I was just pulling some dramatic stunt, but then he said something I never expected to hear from him. "I started thinking about how many photos we've taken over the years," he said, "and how few of them you're in. And I realized you didn't just feel left out. We left you out. On purpose or not, it doesn't matter. It happened. And I'm sorry. It didn't fix anything. It didn't erase the years or the emptiness, or the quiet rooms filled with people who didn't ask me questions about my life. But for some reason, hearing it from Peter, someone who had always benefited from the dynamic even if he hadn't built it, felt like a small crack in the wall. Not a breakthrough, just a shift, a flicker of recognition. He said Lena wasn't ready to talk, that she felt humiliated and exposed, that she'd been ranting about how I always made everything about myself, how I'd ruined her moment. And part of me flared at that, wanted to scream through the phone that I hadn't ruined anything, I just refused to be erased one more time. But I didn't say anything, because that would have made it about her again. And I was finally learning that not everything needed to be a fight. Some things just needed to be left standing in the sun, unspoken but seen. Before Peter hung up, he said, "If you ever want to talk, just call. I won't pretend to get it, but I'll listen." And that, too, was something. I spent the rest of the night rereading the letter, thinking about the kind of man my father had been, the quiet, steady kind who noticed when people were shrinking and did his best to remind them they were worth taking up space. He hadn't changed everything, but he had given me just enough light to find my own way. And maybe that was the real truth in all of this. Not that I needed my family to see me, but that I had always known how to see myself. And now, for the first time in a very long time, I was ready to stop performing. I wasn't going to keep throwing grenades just to get a reaction. I wasn't going to beg for acknowledgement from people who'd rather pretend I was difficult than admit I was right. I was going to build something, not to prove a point, not to impress them, but because I could, and because I finally understood I was worth it. The morning of Lena's baby shower came with the kind of weather that makes you pause at the window and pretend you're in a different life. Maybe one where you're not at war with your own family. Maybe one where the past didn't cling to your bones like wet clothes. The sky was clear, the light was soft, and everything looked unnaturally calm, like the world had no idea what kind of decisions were waiting to be made behind closed doors. I had been invited, which in itself was a surprise, though the invitation had come in the most sterile way possible. A mass email from some event planning service with glitter fonts and a pastel palette, no personal message, no note from Lena. Just a subject line that said, "We're thrilled to welcome baby Kingston," and a list of registry links as long as a CVS receipt. It felt less like an invitation and more like a challenge, like they were daring me to show up again, this time under a tent full of women comparing stroller brands and homemade bath scrubs, pretending the last month hadn't happened. No mention of the banner, no apology, no acknowledgement. It was like they decided to move on without moving through anything, and I was supposed to either play along or remove myself completely. And for days, I didn't know which one I would choose. Because at the same time that pastel invite was sitting in my inbox, something else had landed there too, something far more unexpected, something that, if I were the kind of person who believed in signs, would have made this decision a whole lot easier. Rachel Chin had sent a follow-up to our earlier conversation, This time with an actual offer, seed funding for my latest venture, a spot on a 3-day investor retreat in Los Angeles, and an invite to speak on a panel about women entrepreneurs who redefine the rules. The panel was scheduled for the exact same weekend as Lena's baby shower. It would have been easy to spin that as poetic justice, the woman they overlooked for decades finally standing on a stage while they passed around sugar cookies and onesies, but it didn't feel like justice. It felt like a fork in the road, a final test of who I wanted to be now that I couldn't unsee the truth. Did I go back, sit at their table again, smile through another gathering built on silence and denial? Or did I go forward, even if it meant walking away completely, even if it meant they'd twist the story into something cruel and unfinished? I sat on my couch that morning, suitcase packed, both boarding passes printed, one for Charleston, one for LA, looking back and forth between them like some melodramatic scene in a movie I didn't want to be in. There was no right choice, not really. Both paths came with pain. One meant missing another milestone, letting them spin their version of the narrative while I watched from a distance. The other meant showing up, swallowing my pride, pretending we'd somehow healed just enough to share a plate of finger sandwiches without erupting into awkward silence or veiled comments. And honestly, neither option sat right with me. So I did what I always do when I need clarity. I walked. No phone, no music, just my feet on the sidewalk and my thoughts unraveling like loose thread. I walked through the streets of my neighborhood, past bakeries that had started to remember my order, past construction sites that never seemed to finish, past windows that reflected a version of me I was still trying to believe in. And somewhere around the 3rd mile, I realized something simple but painful. I didn't owe them my presence just because they were family. I didn't owe them my silence, my approval, or my forgiveness on a timeline they controlled. If I went to that baby shower, it would be for them, not for me. And I was done shrinking myself for the comfort of people who couldn't handle the full version of who I had become. So I got on the plane to Los Angeles. The flight was long, but something inside me felt light for the first time in weeks. No bitterness, no regret, just the quiet hum of forward motion. I checked into the hotel, met with Rachel, and stood in front of a room full of strangers who saw me only as the woman I am now, not the girl I used to be. I talked about my company, about growth, about failure, about the weird and exhausting beauty of doing things your own way. I didn't mention the banner. I didn't have to. The message was already in the way I stood, the way I spoke, the way I smiled without apology. That weekend, while I was taking questions about strategy and scalability, Lena posted a carousel of her baby shower. There were flowers, custom cookies, matching dresses, perfectly staged moments. I wasn't in any of them, of course. And this time, I didn't care. Not in the bitter way. Not in the resigned way. Just didn't care. Because I was building something else now. Not just a business, not just an empire, but a life where I didn't need their applause to feel real. A life where being seen by the right people mattered more than being accepted by the wrong ones. And maybe one day, the silence between me and Lena will shift into something more honest. Maybe she'll reach out not because she feels obligated, but because she finally wants to. Or maybe she won't. Maybe we'll stay broken in this quiet, aching way that families sometimes do. Not every story gets wrapped up with a bow. Not every fight ends in forgiveness. But that's the thing about building something from the ground up. It doesn't matter who was there when you started. It only matters who's still standing beside you when you finish. And I plan to finish standing tall. Even if I'm standing alone.